If you have your Bibles, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 14. We're going to look at the story of the Red Sea, the Israelites this morning. I think we can all agree that this year has been a very different year. I know I've spoken on it several times, but I feel like seeing from my perspective in the area of life that I'm in with a lot of friends and a lot of people, seeing things on Facebook and online, I felt like we've seen a lot of anxiety over this past year and a lot of fear. And that's really been something I've been walking through, something I've been discouraged by is just so much fear, so much anxiety. And it's not something to be taken lightly. I think with everything going on, with the heated political climate, with the pandemic, things that are insecure, schools closing, reopening, and all the different schedules, it's caused a lot of that sort of issue with fear. The issue with anxiety of not knowing, the uncertainty. And I wanted to speak on Exodus 14 this morning. We'll get to it in just a little bit on that struggle of trust, right? When fear and anxiety come, where do we place our trust? In the circumstances of life, the things that we face, are we trusting in the Lord and what He's leading us through? And I'm sure your first initial answer is yes, of course. But with looking at this year, I don't know if you've seen that. I've just seen so much fear. In church family, we are not called to fear. Now, I'm not diminishing that if that's something that you've been through. It's something I've seen in my own life with my own children and looking at the world that they're going to grow into, when they get older. I have that fear, I have that worry, I have that anxiety. But I just want to encourage you, I want to challenge you this morning. Where do you place your trust? Is it in your own power? Is it in your own strength? I think something each and every one of us face, it's deeper than just the uncertainty of the circumstances of life. I believe it's deeper than these things that we're walking through in our days. I think it's something each and every one of us faces, something we all struggle with within our hearts, the pain that we bear, and the choice of whether or not we're going to trust the Lord in and through it. Each and every day, a choice that we get to make to surrender fully upon Him, the God, the only one who is more than able, the one who's able to save, the one who's able to heal, the one who's able, even when things don't go the way we think they should, He's got a bigger plan. And He's painting this bigger picture. And we just need to trust Him through it. We need to trust Him through the wilderness of life. And that's what I want to entitle the message today, the wilderness of life. Because we'll see as we read Exodus chapter 14, the wilderness that the Israelites had to face. And I believe today many of us are facing that type of wilderness as well. It's the uncertain, it's the anxious, it's the fear, right? I want to speak on that this morning. I want to share with you a story. I don't know if many of you like going hiking or camping or just walking trails and stuff like that. I try each year to take the students to Arabia Mountain. It's a beautiful place, not too far away from here. It's like a mini Stone Mountain. If you've ever hiked Stone Mountain before, you know it is a mini Stone Mountain. Like Stone Mountain's it's a lot, right? It's a little bit of a hike. Arabia Mountain's not that much, but it does have paths, a lot of different paths for you to trail and hike on, some that are easier, some that are longer. And take the students during the summer because I want them to be, just super tired after they're done because it's going to be super hot, right? Take them down the paths, and usually we go down one path, and a couple years ago I decided, we'll take a different one this time, kind of give us a little bit more of a challenge, right? We'll go a different way. I had a map with me and everything, right? And I don't know where at some point, the paths intersected, and we took, instead of following the path that I was thinking of going on, we went the other way, we went the opposite way. And I chose the kind of easy medium path, and the one that intersected was the hard long path. And so we start walking down this trail, right? We start walking down this, and they have them color-coded and stuff like that. And I don't know how I missed that, but we're walking down this trail. I'm like, this isn't, I've never seen this before. I don't know, what are we doing? Where are we going? And the students are like, Nick, how far are we going to go down this trail? And I was like, honestly, guys, I don't know. And I'm starting to worry, right? I don't know if y'all have ever been in the position before. Maybe it's not like hiking or camping, but like you've been trying to go somewhere and you got off track and maybe the GPS took you the wrong way, whatever the case, and you've kind of feel that fear, right? Of like, I don't know where I am. And that anxiety of not knowing where you are and where you want to be. I don't know if you've ever felt that before. Like I felt that fully when I took those students on that trip. And they knew that. They could sense that within me. Eventually, don't worry, we made it back to civilization. We kept everyone. Everyone's good. Everyone's good. And I was like, all right, I need to make sure next time that the path that we take, that I have it, scheduled out, marked out, and everything. Anyway, it was just a crazy, crazy thing that happened. Everyone had fun. It was a blast. It was just a lot longer than we thought would take us to go on that trip. But eventually we made it back, and it was good. But just thinking of that situation, I feel like that's where we are as a people. We feel that pressure, right? We feel that anxiety of like, where are our leaders taking us? Where is our country going? Where is our world going? What are we doing right now? How are we dealing with the school situation? How are we dealing with the virus situation? How are we dealing with our families in the midst of it, and how we're leading them and teaching them and encouraging them to be strong in the midst of the uncertainty? I think that struggle, it sometimes brings out the worst in us. It brings out the worst fears within us. And I believe this is the same as we read in Exodus chapter 14, the people of Israel, after God led them out of Egypt. They didn't have a roadmap. They didn't know where they were. They had an idea, right? They knew they were going to the promised land, but they just had to fully trust in their God to lead them, to direct them. And Moses, as a leader, they just had to trust that God was leading them where they needed to go. And I don't know if you've read the Old Testament, if you've read Exodus before, you know that they struggle with this, right? Because we are people, we like control, right? We like knowing where we're going. We like knowing what we're doing. And when things don't go the way we think they should, we begin to doubt. We begin to become fearful and anxious. But yet God is leading. And church, I want to encourage you just in the very beginning today to trust and believe that our God is still in control today. He's never lost his control. He's never lost his control. When things seem out of control in our lives, God is still in control. He's still leading, guiding, and directing. But yet we have that choice. Will we follow him? Will we trust him? And will we honor him and make him known in those days, in those wilderness paths that we're uncertain about? So, Exodus chapter 14, give you a little context before we read. We're going to read the entire chapter together this morning. We'll break it down in a couple different sections. So, the people of Israel, they've been enslaved to serve the Egyptians for 430 years. An incredible long time. God, he had heard their pleas for freedom, their prayers for freedom. And he remembered his promise to Abraham that he would make a great nation out of him to be with his descendants. So he calls a man named Moses, a fearful man, a man who made several excuses of why he wasn't to be the leader of the Israelites, God's called leader. But yet God chose him, called him, and then he goes to Pharaoh after the 10 plagues. Pharaoh lets them go and they begin this journey to the promised land. See, they knew their destination, but the problem was, how were they going to get there, right? They had minimal supplies, they had women, children, long journey ahead of them. It was a big task, but yet God was with them. And that's the key thing. We have to remember, God was with them and his promise was ahead of them. We have both of those. God is with us, and his promise is ahead of us in Jesus Christ, in eternity, the second coming of Christ. We cannot forget that, church, today. So let's read it together. Verse 1 through verse 9. It says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. in front of Baal-Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea, for Pharaoh will save the people of Israel. They are wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Remember that. Verse 4, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, what is this that we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot, took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all of Pharaoh's horses and chariots and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamped at the sea at Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-Zephon. So the Israelites are walking along, trusting the Lord, following him. They're victorious. They've been taken out of Egypt, God's mighty hand and his power, right? Can consider their joy, now knowing this journey is going to be long, but their joy in seeing what God had done, the miracles that he had done to bring them out of slavery, even though they had no clue what was going on, where they were going. God knew. He knew exactly what was going to happen. And listen, he knew that Pharaoh was going to come after them. He knew that Pharaoh and his army was going to come after them. He knew that they did not have a way in their own power to cross the Red Sea. But here's the point. God did not lose his cool. He did not freak out on them and tell them to run as fast as possible, to find a different way, or to build makeshift rafts and try to get everyone across the Red Sea. What did he tell them? Verse 1, or verse 2. Tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp. He tells them to stop and to rest. You see, God knew that they needed rest. Remember, they've been walking, women, children, minimal supplies, carrying all their belongings. But isn't it interesting, right? God knew that Pharaoh was going to chase after them. He knows he's all sovereign, he has all power, omniscient. But yet he tells them to stop and to rest. And it's interesting to me because he knew that his people needed rest. Even though the circumstances were that Pharaoh was going to chase after them, they were going to be fearful, they were going to worry, he still called them to rest. And I believe that's interesting because God knows what was best for them. And church family, God knows what is best for us. And sometimes we face those times where we're like, I don't really understand, God, why I'm here. I don't understand why this is happening. I don't really get the entire picture here. But yet he's still calling you to it. He's calling you to that place. Or he's still calling you to follow him, to trust in him, to believe upon him, to rest in him. In church today, we've got to start. When you face that fear, when you face that anxiety, to rest upon the Lord in his promises, in his goodness. He knew that the Israelites, his people, needed rest. So even though Pharaoh was going to chase after them, he still called them to stop and to take a break. Look at verse 3 again. It says, Pharaoh will save the people. They're wandering in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. See, even though the Israelites didn't know that Pharaoh was going to come after them and try to take them back, they didn't know that there would be a giant Red Sea blocking their escape. It's kind of a perfect plan for Pharaoh here. He knew they were going to have to stop. They have to find a way around the Red Sea. But even though the wilderness of the Red Sea had shut them in, that had nothing on our God. And you see, haven't yet seen what God can do. But nothing that the wilderness had in store, nothing the Red Sea had in store, what seemed impossible could ever stop God from accomplishing his own plan and his own power, from doing the impossible. So if you're here this morning, maybe you've struggled with a form of anxiety or fear. You've struggled with a form of, God, I don't know how I can make it through this. I don't know how this situation, it seems impossible. This diagnosis seems impossible. I don't know how I can get through this. God can make a way. In his own strength, in his own power, in his own plan, and by his own timing, God can make a way. It's not always our plan, right? It's not always our way of things. It's not what we want, but God can make a way through, and he's going to get the glory from it. Look at verse 4. He says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. If you're walking through that impossibility, if you're walking through that circumstance and you're uncertain of it, believe upon the Lord that he is with you. He can make a way in his plan and his power, but also God can receive the glory from it if we're just willing, church, to trust him. Trust him with it. The Pharaoh thought he had everything planned, verses 5 through 9, but again, he had nothing on God. So what do we see from the very beginning of this scripture in Exodus chapter 14? Number one, God knew what was best for his people. That's why he called them to stop and to rest. And church, maybe today we need to do the same. To rest upon the Lord. Maybe you've been going. You've been busy at the Lord's work or busy at your work or a mix of everything in between. Would you stop today and believe that God has and knows what's best for you and just rest upon his promises? Number two, no wilderness could stop God. He can make a way even when it seems that it's impossible. And number three, he will receive glory from it. And God will be glorified and people will see him working through your life. Let's read verses 10 through 14 together. It says, when Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What a statement. Is not this what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Those are strong words of painful position that the people were in. Verse 13, Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. So what happened when the Israelites woke up and saw Pharaoh's army chasing after them? Naturally, they were afraid. They had just gotten away from slavery. God had brought them out. And now the very same nation that had enslaved them, with the power that they had, was going to destroy them because they had left. So you can't really blame them in what they're saying here. Just look at verse 11. Is it because there are no graves that you've taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us? Verse 12, is not this what we said in Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians, for it is better to stay in Egypt than to walk in the wilderness, than to walk along God's plan. It is better for us to stay in slavery. You see, they look to Moses, and not only do they blame him for their troubles, but they also point the finger at God. So Moses wasn't the one who had the power to bring the 10 plagues. Moses wasn't the one who was able to speak through a burning bush. Moses wasn't the one who was able to bring a whole nation out of Egypt, out of slavery miraculously. Moses wasn't the one who could provide a cloud by day and a fire by night. That was all God, right? But they forgot about God's miracles when the pain came, when the uncertainty came, when the fear came. They forgot about the power of God. They forgot about the goodness of God. They forgot about the promises of God, all because of the struggle and all because of the difficulty. And that's not the only sad part. The sad part is that they wish to go back to what wasn't God's plan for them. Something that actually caused them, remember, to cry out in anguish for 430 years. They wanted to go back to that situation. It's kind of like dumbfounding, right? Like, why would you want that? Church, listen to me, because it was comfortable. Because they got meals every day. And it wasn't easy, but it was routine. It was a part of life. Let's be honest with ourselves. How many times have we forgotten the goodness of God, the promises of God, the love of God, the power of God, all because of the circumstances that we face, that we're facing right now in these days? So we read this and go, I don't understand why they would act like that. God just did so much for them. But yet we do the same. We blame God when things don't go the way we want. We long to go back to what we felt good or what made us comfortable, even though it hurt us. Maybe you're realizing just now the thing that you're doing right now isn't really making you happy. It's not God's best for you. It's stealing your joy. But it's comfortable. It's easy. It brings you moments of satisfaction. These are the things that have enslaved us, the things that we could call our own Egypts. Maybe it's seeking approval. Maybe it's to fit an image. Maybe it's sin that you've struggled with. The worst thing, church family, we can do is to do the same thing the Israelites did in this moment, and it's to forget God, to forget Him in our days. Because when we forget God, we lose that strength and that encouragement. When we forget God, we miss opportunities to make Him known, to claim His name. That's why it's so powerful. We walk through these days together and we believe upon the Lord Jesus. People see that. It changes lives because that is God's strength. That is God's power being made known, being glorified. The church, if you feel like you're in the same position where it's easy to become comfortable, it's easy to look back on the routine or those things that you struggle with. Listen, it's time to stop looking back and start moving forward to what God has called you to what He set you free from. God's plan for you, looking to what God has for you rather than those things that you struggle with. So today, let us start moving forward instead of continuing to look back. Trusting in God's plan. And it starts with a decision to surrender our lives to Him. Say, Lord, here I am. Here I am, all of me. I don't want to keep looking back. I want to trust in you. I don't want to make the same mistakes. I don't want to forget you. I don't want to trust in my own power. God, I want to trust in you. I want to follow your plan for my life. We've got to surrender to Him. Look at verse 13 and 14 again. So out of that fear, right? Out of that worry, this is how Moses responds. He says, fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which He will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. This is what we need to remember as we walk through our days. Stand firm. Stand firm, fear not. Watch God work. God is fighting for us. We only have to trust Him. We only have to remember what He's done. A verse I really love for you to remember is from verse 14. I will fight for you. You have only to be silent. Let's look at what happens next. Verse 15. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff, stretch out your hand over the sea, and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians. They will go in after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots, and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I've gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God who was going before the host of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was the cloud and the darkness, and it lit up the night without no one coming near the other all night. The people of Israel had nowhere to go. Armies right on their heels. It's impossible. There's no way out. The wilderness had shut them in, and their fear had crippled them. But what does God say in verse 15? Go forward. Move on. Keep going. I think I read that in the New Testament, right? When Paul says, I finished the fight, kept the faith, I finished the race, right? Keep pressing forward, church. Don't stop chasing after the Lord. Don't stop pursuing his call in your life. He can make a way, even to the point of splitting the Red Sea in two to make a way for his people. Let's continue reading verse 21. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. The Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land. The waters were divided. The people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw them into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel. Why? For the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians, God's glory being made known. God's power being made known. Verse 26, and the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea that the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. As the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw them into the midst of the sea. The waters returned, covered the chariots, horsemen of all the hosts of Pharaoh, and that had followed him into the sea. Not one of them remained. Verse 29, the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Verse 30, thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power that the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. See, this is a beautiful picture of what God can do. A powerful picture of what God can do to make a way through the wilderness, through the impossibility where there seems to be no way. Listen, church family, do you trust that he can do the same thing? You trust that in our days we will see him glorified? Do you trust that he's providing for us right now opportunities to glorify him in the midst of those around us, in our family, our friends, in our community? To say, this is the power of the Lord. This is what he can do. Trust upon him. Will you leave behind the Egypt, the past life, the sin, the struggles, the doubt, the worry, the uncertainty, and trust fully upon the Lord? See, an encouraging message, the encouraging thought coming from the message this morning is as we look at the Red Sea, we don't just see what God can do for the Israelites. We see what God has done for us through the cross of Jesus. That there was an impossibility, sin in our hearts, and nothing we could do to save ourselves. Nothing we could do to cleanse ourselves. All we were left with was that sin and uncertainty and fear and doubt. No power of our own. But yet God, through Jesus Christ, made a way, split the Red Sea of sin in two so that we could come to him and experience an eternity with him forever, a relationship with him that we desperately needed. This is the good news for us today. That maybe you came here and you had that fear and doubt and anxiety, or maybe you came here and you have no idea who Jesus is. The good news is through Jesus you can have life. You can be set free. All you need to do is trust upon him. John 3:16, for God so loved that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes upon him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. If you've never made that decision, I want to encourage you today to consider making it. It's the best decision I've ever made. I know that sounds very biased, but I'll believe there's many around you that would second that as well. God knows you. He loves you. Don't allow the slavery of the past, the fear, the anxiety that we're walking through in this life cripple you from the faith that God has called you to, the calling that God has called you to make him known. Let's trust him, Salem family. Let's trust God and do what he's called us to do. And what he's called us to do is to move forward for his glory. Move forward for his fame. And make sure the best we can to let everyone know what he's done for us. Let's pray together.